everyone, and welcome to our very last fairy tale reading of the summer. I hope you guys have enjoyed some of these readings. I found them kind of fascinating to compare some of the original versions to the stories that, the versions that I've heard growing up and that I've shared with my kids. They've been a little bit different, haven't they? So for our last reading, we are going to be reading the Elves and the Shoemaker. Actually, in our big fat grim book here, it's just entitled The Elves. I'm sure you guys have all heard this story, though, about the little elves who come into the cobbler's house and make the beautiful shoes for him. Now, I'm doing a little bit of research about kind of the history of elves. I found that they actually started out as a Norse myth, meaning that they came from like the Germany area, and that elves, fairies, gnomes, they all have kind of melded into the same kind of creature. They all started out with very different and specific qualities and characteristics, but nowadays that name is kind of interchangeable. But the one thing that does hold true with elves is that they can either be very, very helpful to humans or very harmful and dangerous. There's kind of no in between with these creatures. Back when they were first writing stories about elves, they were blamed for a lot of things, bringing illness to people. If something happened to your baby, then the elves probably stole it. Changelings, things like that. So they were blamed for a lot of really bad things that happened to humans, but they were also the source of healing and helpful in growing crops, things like that. So kind of interesting how they played such a very distinct role in the history and in the mythology, but very polar opposite, like either super, super helpful and nice and wonderful, or almost evil and mean. So we are going to read here The Elves from The Complete Fairy Tales of the Brothers Grimm book. And it's a short one this week, so not too terribly long. Here we go. There once was a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, had become so poor that he had only enough leather left for a single pair of shoes. That evening he cut out the shoes, which he planned to work on the next morning, and since he had a clear conscience, he lay down quietly in his bed, commended himself to God, and fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers and was about to sit down to do his work, he saw the two shoes standing all finished on his workbench. He was so astounded by this that he did not know what to say. He took the shoes in his hand to examine them more closely and saw that the shoes were perfect. Not a single bad stitch could be found, and it was as if the shoes were intended to be masterpieces. Shortly after, a customer entered the shop, and he liked the shoes so much he paid more than the usual price for them. The money enabled the shoemaker to purchase leather for 2 pairs of shoes. In the evening, he cut them out and planned to begin work on them with renewed vigor the next morning. However, it was not necessary, for the shoes were already finished by the time he awoke. Once again, he found customers for them, and they gave him enough money to purchase leather for 4 pairs of shoes. The following morning, he found the 4 pairs of shoes already made, and so it went. Whatever he cut out in the evening was finished by morning. And soon, he had a decent income again and eventually became a well-to-do man. Now, one evening, not long before Christmas, it happened that the man had been cutting leather, and just before he went to bed, he said to his wife, What would you think about staying up tonight? If we do that, we might be able to see who's been lending us such a helping hand." His wife agreed and lit a candle. Then they hid themselves behind some clothes that were hanging in the corner of the room and watched closely. When it was midnight, two cute little naked elves scampered into the room, sat down at the shoemaker's workbench, took all the work that had been cut out, and began to stitch, sew, and hammer so skillfully and nimbly with their little fingers that the amazed shoemaker could not take his eyes off of them. Indeed, they did not stop until everything was done and the shoes were left standing on the workbench. Then they quickly ran away. The next morning, the wife said, "The little men have made us rich. We ought to show them that we're grateful for their help. Do you know what? Since they run around without any clothes on, they must be freezing. I'm going to sew some shirts, coats, jackets, and trousers for them. I'll also knit a pair of stockings for each, and you can make them both a pair of shoes." "That's fine with me," the husband said. In the evening, after they had finished everything, they put the gifts on the workbench instead of the cutout leather and hid themselves in order to see how the elves would react. At midnight, the elves came scampering into the room and wanted to get right down to work, but they found the nice little clothes instead of the cutout leather. At first they were puzzled, but then they were tremendously pleased. They put the clothes on quickly, smoothed them down, and said, "Now we look so fine and dandy. No more need to work and be handy." Then they skipped, danced, and jumped over chairs and benches. Finally, they danced right out of the door and were never seen again. But the shoemaker continued to be prosperous until the end of his life and succeeded in all his endeavors. The end. I told you it was a short reading this time. So these little elves were very helpful to the man and his wife in making the little shoes, kind of like Santa's elves, right? They make all the toys that Santa brings for Christmas. Yeah, these were not mean-spirited elves. These were nice ones. So, well, I really hope that you guys have enjoyed our fairy tale readings this summer. And I look forward to sharing more stories with you sometime again in the future. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.